Testing. Testing.
Now I can hear.
Okay, you didn't have the mic plugged into the.
No, I had the mic plugged in, but apparently the mic doesn't work with the app, so I'm just going to go with regular audio.
Well, we'll just have to deal with you as you are.
Yeah, right, exactly.
As anybody who knows you has to do.
Yeah.
So, hey, it's good to see you. When was the last time I saw you?
I was just going to say, it's great to see you, too. And I think the last time we actually did see each other, we went to grab some coffee and breakfast at that spot you loved in Burbank. I forget the name of it.
Oh, was it? Yeah, like by the Equestrian Center. Was that the one by, or Priscilla's?
I think it was, yeah, I think it was that one. Because I think you were telling me like Bryan Cranston was like a regular there in the past.
I probably was name dropping at that. I probably was. Whether he came there, went there or not, I have no idea. But I probably thought, oh, I want to get this in here. Yeah. Well, he's a Valley guy, Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
Did you know his dad was an actor, like a long time, one of those guest stars in all like those old westerns and stuff from the 1950s?
I did. I actually read his book, which I believe is called My Life in Pieces or My Life in Parts, I believe.
Yeah.
It's a memoir. It's fantastic.
Very good.
Yeah, he talks about how his relationship with his father, because he said his dad never got to the level he wanted to.
Right,
Like,
right.
I think he said they kind of had some, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but they had like some resentment. Like he had some resentment towards his son because he was able to achieve a certain level of success. But it was a great read. And yes, he did mention how his dad was an actor, a thespian, and that's kind of.
I thought you were going to say, well, his dad was a piece of work. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I know plenty of those myself, but I can't testify to Mr. Cranston's dad.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Bryan is very popular around here where I now live, where I've relocated because of course Breaking Bad was
Right,
filmed
New
here.
Mexico.
And I live about a block away from the Dirty Bourbon Bar, and every time somebody either comes over here or I mention where I live, they say, "Oh, that's by the Dirty Bourbon Bar. That's the thing. That's what Breaking Bad." And I didn't watch like a lot of episodes. I watched a few episodes of Breaking Bad, and I love that. I intend to go through it and watch the whole thing. But before I go further, I'm having such a great chat with you. That's why I got to do my introduction here. So
yeah,
this is the Dave Bean is a C-List Actor Zoomcast, and I am the aforementioned Dave Bean of the title. And my very special guest today is Chicago-based actor Frank Menolascino, who one of my favorite people that I ever met when I lived in LA, which I did for like almost 40 years. I don't even think you're that old, Frank.
I'm not. No,
no I know you. I know you're not.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope so. But do you recall when it was that you and I first met in LA?
I do, and I could first want to say, thank you for having me. I feel honored that you would even consider me for this, let alone, be on it right off the bat with you. And that actually kind of leads into how we met, because we met on the Universal backlot during those late nights. And it was actually during October when the World Series was going on.
Right. Which starts tonight, I think.
Oh yeah, you know what? You're right. So that would be like this week, 5 years ago is when we met. That's crazy. Yeah.
Kismet. Anyway, but we can talk a little bit of baseball later. But continue. Yeah. So we were on the back lot, Universal.
Yeah, back lot of Universal, and the World Series was going on. We had the game on nearby us, and I remember seeing you. You had your arms crossed. You were locked in, like you were in the dugout, like you were managing it yourself. You had the ball cap on.
Always.
I don't remember who struck up the conversation first, but I just remember that we started talking.
Right.
And it was like that, just like immediate connection and engagement. And we started talking, we were talking ball, and then we were talking shop about how we got to Los Angeles, how we ended up in that very moment to even. Yeah. And unfortunately, your Dodgers lost that series to the Red Sox.
Oh, well, and they just got crushed again this time. Well, I'll have to do a baseball podcast or a Zoomcast or whatever, because that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I'm sure that would have been the connection. because I know, yeah, we were doing some very, very late night work on the back lot there at NBC Universal.
Mhm.
And I would have been, not that I don't remember it, but I'm glad you remember the specifics. But I would have been in one of the green rooms there watching the
Yeah.
ball game because yeah, they had the TV up on the wall there, and I'm sure that I was locked in World Series time. How how late we were there really, really late a few of those nights.
Yeah, sometimes it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, but it was fun. I'll tell you,
It
it's a
was fun.
lot of fun if you're lucky enough to be on Universal's lot that late.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
It was amazing. It was a lot, it was a ton of fun. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, one of the reasons why, of course, is that you're surrounded by people who are doing what we do, whether depending, whatever department you're in, whether you're
Yeah.
in front of the camera, behind the camera, um, aspiring to do something in that realm or whatever. So those were some good days. One of the things that I miss a lot, and I was on that back lot at Universal for 5 years.
Mhm.
And I loved it. I used to work out on the back lot. When I was done with whatever work I was doing that day, I would
Mhm.
go throughout, the old Western sets and Little Europe and,
Yeah, I
and
love Little Europe.
yeah, and I would absolutely and weave in and out of the sound stages, and you'd run into you know people that you knew, and then all there you go around the corner, and there were the folks from various TV shows or movies filming their thing, and yeah, it was a real. I feel very, very fortunate, but
They really did have fantastic facilities for their employees. You know,
yeah,
anybody who was working there on location, just
yeah.
fantastic amenities.
Yeah, well, and of course, what I remember is like whether it be the commissary or that little Take Five restaurant, because
Yeah, wasn't that something? I
yeah,
can, I was just telling somebody about that place here back home, how amazing that place was
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of their food quality and food selection for every
yeah.
meal,
For
breakfast,
for
lunch, and dinner.
yeah, for everything. Yeah, and I love it that they had like 1950s level prices for those of us who were like,
Yeah,
you
that was
know,
the best part. Yeah, you were really getting a bang for your buck. I mean, you just don't see a lot of that nowadays.
yeah, it was like now this is yeah. So say this was whatever that was 4 years ago, right before the pandemic.
Yeah,
Once
it's in
I don't know.
2018.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it was like, what was it? $2.50, $3 for like, a cheeseburger and fries or whatever.
Mhm.
Or I used to get the big salad guy. Not that I don't love my pizza and burgers and stuff, but
Yeah,
when you're there every day, my God,
right, right.
there was no way I could eat that every day. But you come out of there, you'd pay, $2 or $3, and I was like, thank you, NBC Universal. How
I
cool,
know.
how cool was that?
Great.
So that was very cool. Now, so that's how we met, which is very cool. And I think one of the things that impressed me the most when I met you, and probably why I felt there was this instant connection, and probably the reason why I asked you and you were fortunate enough to agree to come on here, was because I got right away that you were like a real deal guy, a real deal person. There wasn't there wasn't any pretense, and even though there's an exaggerated amount of pretense that's credited to LA and the film industry, because I've met real people all the time, but with you, there was something special. And then what I found out after talking with you is, yeah, you're a Chicago actor,
Mm,
and that's a different breed of cat
yeah.
altogether. What I even want to go back even earlier than that. What was the How old were you, or when was it that they say you caught the bug? But when did you know that acting was going to pervade your life?
There's a couple of moments. When I was around 8 years old, there were two films in particular that
Mhm.
stood out to me, which you really wouldn't think for an 8-year old, but my parents were all about, letting me watch the movies that they enjoyed. And so the
Right.
first, which you really wouldn't think of when somebody says, "What made you want to do?" Oh, I guess you could, but like from the acting perspective, was the original Halloween,
Oh wow, wow.
78.
Jamie Lee Curtis. Yeah, speaking of
Yeah, John Carpenter.
yeah.
What I loved about that film, just from a standpoint of character, you have the
Mhm.
Michael Myers character, which at that point in time was simply known only as the Shape, and
Right,
he's just this mysterious figure that pops up at the most opportune time, the perfect time, no matter what, and he's just
right,
always where he should be in like this terrifying story. But from a standpoint of, when you grow up and you realize the magic of filmmaking and all that comes together, I was like, man, this actor who has no lines,
right.
but is so effective in this, from when you look at it, like, oh, well, I'm not, like, if you're an actor who's like, somebody says, I want you to play this part, and you read what it is, you're like, well, am I really doing anything even? Like, why? It's like, why would I take this? I don't speak. I'm in a mask the whole time.
Right.
The role is so critical and important for obvious reasons to that whole film. And it just attracted me so much to how somebody can
Hmm.
make so much with so little.
So you were able to intuit at that time that this wasn't, I mean, part of you was sucked into the story, but the other part was there's an individual here who is portraying a character, and you kind of intuited what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah, because
Wow.
I was just mesmerized by it, and then once I became a little older, you understand it more.
Right, right, right.
And then the second film, which of course this won't surprise anybody, and I mean, you know me, so I come from an Italian American family, so The Godfather, which is
Oh, well, yeah, yeah,
religious.
yeah.
It's a religion in my household, in my family.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
when I watched that when I was a kid, my dad, he'll still watch it whenever it's on TV, no matter what point it's on in the movie,
Me
and I'm
too.
the same way. And when I saw that, I mean, again, you understand more as you get older when you can grasp the themes and the weight of what's really going on. But just from a standpoint of watching a movie and being
Yeah,
completely enthralled with Al Pacino as Michael Corleone,
right,
and
right,
just that transformation of where he goes from beginning to middle to end
right.
is just a tour de force of acting the craft in general, in screen acting, in cinematic
Hmm.
storytelling. I mean, it's
Hmm.
the perfect storm of everything. And those two films in particular are what just sucked me in
That's
and
great.
set me on the path of like what I wanted to do once I was old enough to know, like,
Yeah,
this is it.
yeah. That's great. Yeah, I'm all in on The Godfather 1 and 2, and of course, 3 we don't talk much about, but they tried to fix it somewhat, but anyway, 1 and 2 just masterworks of Francis Coppola, who is from Detroit, the town
Yes.
where I grew up, and of course his daughter Sophia,
Sophia, yeah.
fantastic director in her own right as well. So when you were old enough to kind of connect the dots, obviously you watched more movies. But at some point, did you see a play? Did you see anything on stage that you recall where you were able to say, okay, so they do this? Because and I can I'll like for me, yeah, I was, and like you, we must have had parents from the same school. I'm 10 years old, and my dad is dragging me. Speaking of Pacino, my dad's taking me to Serpico,
Yeah. Oh yeah, another
seeing
classic.
cops shot in the face.
Right.
Dad, although to be completely honest, as a wee lad, I did go see the first movie I remember going to see was like Bambi. Okay.
Mm.
And, but I also remember saying to my mom, I don't ever, I apologize, Disney folks. Right away, I jumped off the animated Disney bandwagon. That's a me thing. When people always try to talk me back into it, I'm like, okay, okay, you know what? It's like when you break up, it's me. It's not you. I'm missing a part. I
The
don't
old
connect with.
George Costanza. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't. Right. Yeah, it's a breakup. It just didn't take. But um, but anyway, so when my dad started taking me to the movies to get out of the house, another story for a psychology
Right.
podcast one day. But dad would, my mom would say, but you got to take the kid. And so he'd drag me, would jump in the old Ford Galaxy 500. And next thing you know, I'm at some theater watching Serpico. And then he took me to see a movie called Johnny Got His Gun. Great book, Dalton Trumbo. Great story.
Another Bryan Cranston connection. He played Trumbo, didn't he?
Absolutely, which one of those movies I can watch over and over again, because you got Cranston, you got Trumbo, and you got that whole blacklisted area, unfortunately, but it's done so well. So I went to see Johnny Got His Gun, which is pretty much all about a kid in World War One. I think it's Timothy Bottoms. Goes away and gets every limb in his body blown off, and all he can do in the hospital is communicate by tapping his head against the pillow, and the nurse figures out he's giving Morse code,
right,
and realizes that there's the only thing that he has, because all of this is blown off. Yeah.
Not to interrupt you,
it's okay.
Isn't this what the song "One" by Metallica is about?
Okay, well now you're entering a realm that I'm not. I know who Metallica is. I know, is it James Hetfield?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the song "One," which is about a war veteran who has none of his limbs because he was horrifically injured, and it's about his POV, like inside his own head. I am almost certain it's about the film you're talking about. It's inspired by the film you're talking about. You have to, when we're done here, look up the song and Google it real quick.
Absolutely, and it wouldn't surprise me, because I'm going to guess. Surprisingly, I watched that Metallica documentary. I don't know if you saw this. Okay, yeah. Because I'm always interested, whether it's a field I'm interested in necessarily. I love to watch films, TV docs about artistic process, whether it's my craft or their craft. So when I saw that, I wanted to see, because at a certain point you realize, even in, with Metallica, these guys are musicians, man. These are gifted musicians. And when, you learn a lot about these guys, a lot of them were classically trained. And, but anyway, I will take a look at that. But that is the movie, and I think I'm 10 or 11 years old. So I was both, I'm sure I had nightmares, but I was never a timid kid. I was always like a bring it on, whatever it is. And as I got a little older, I realized those are the kind of movies that I liked, were like, if you think about The Godfather, think about Johnny Got His Gun, think about Serpico. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to make them interesting dramatically to keep your audience hooked and interested. But I always liked and gravitated, as I have as both a filmmaker and as an actor, to real stories about real people. So those are the situations that I like. But I'm digressing. But you know what? There is no digressing with this chat. So those are the movies that formed me, or formed my awareness that film was a craft, and I was curious about it. But I remember going to my first stage play, and as far as I can recall, the first professional theater performance I ever went to was Sherlock Holmes. It was in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And playing Sherlock Holmes was Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, wow. Spot.
Right? Okay, right, which is the natural thing. But being that I don't have the sci-fi gene, I knew that he was Spock, but I never really watched the show. But I just loved that performance. And I became a big fan of his immediately. And that had an indelible impression on me, because it was live theater. Sure. And I was, and although I'd already performed as a kid, my very first stage appearance was in 3rd grade in The Nutcracker. I was a little dancing kid in one of the one of the things. So, but what do you recall, Frank, as the first either stage, whether it be in person or maybe you saw a video of a play, or how did you, because Chicago theater, maybe something happened there.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. It's really fascinating now that you break it down that way. And when I talked about those movies earlier that inspired me, I always wanted to be an actor. And when I thought, okay, the way you do that is you act in movies, I had no awareness, believe it or not, of the theater or stage.
Right.
So until I got old enough to pursue the craft on my own, when I learned of all that, because I had nobody who could point me in the direction of, like, oh, you want to be an actor? Well, here's how you do that. Here's what you look into. Here's where you go. Here's how you do that.
Right, right.
So when I started, navigating those roads by myself, I became theatrically trained. I was trained with a lifelong stage actor.
Okay.
And I started my first experiences as an actor were on stage. And that's what made me fall in love with just like the craft period, because I don't know it from the lens of, no pun intended, of watching movies or television.
Right, right.
And and that's still what was always my end game goal.
Right.
But to me, having done both, having performed for the camera and having performed on stage, there is nothing that compares to being on the stage in front of a live audience.
Right, right.
It's not comparable. I mean, don't get me wrong. Acting for the camera is wonderful, and it's an entirely different, it's all technical. The craft is the same, but the technical aspects are different. But there's just nothing like the freedom of being on that stage as a live wire, because you can do so much more without the restraints of, and as you're also a filmmaker, writer, director, in addition to your acting. So what it's like when you've got actors in front of a camera, and if you do one thing in the master shot, you better be doing it for the others, and for continuity's sake.
Right.
You gotta always keep that in the back of your head.
Yep.
In addition to your performance.
Right, right.
There's none of that on stage. You can do whatever the hell you want, whenever you want, and that's it.
Right.
There's no second take, there's no third take, and I also love the rush of the fact that this is one go. And if something happens, you better run with it. Like, there's no starting and stopping. Like, there's just nothing that compares to that for me personally.
Right, right. No, and that's great stuff. Although the good thing is take when you're doing a play, take two could happen the following night.
Well, yes, that's true. But I just meant from the standpoint of
right. Oh yeah, yeah.
When
you're off to the races.
Yeah, whenever those lights go on for the action, the stage equivalent of action. Yeah. There's no cut until 2 hours later. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What was the very first play that you remember where you had, a pretty chunky role that you could dive deep into?
So I will actually answer this in two parts. So the first piece of work that I ever did as an actor in my very first acting class was a piece from the play, which they're actually remounting. And I'm so envious of, I forget, somebody notable is doing it. I was like, man, I always wanted to actually play that part once I first worked on it. As an 18-year-old, impressionable 18-year-old. Danny in the Deep Blue Sea. You know that?
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah.
So that John Turturro originated that role, and love John Turturro.
Yes.
And somebody right now who's notable is doing it. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up again later. Yeah. But I remember that play is so intense.
Yeah.
And it just gripped me. I was like, man, like this is really what it is. This is what I've always wanted to do. I'm finally doing it. And what a piece of work to be doing it with, but like baptism by fire in terms of going to dark places and whatnot. But the first role that I was cast in terms of professionally, for me, that really, it was my first lead role on stage, and it was actually an original work called No Witness. It was a play about the life of Sam Giancana, Chicago mob boss.
Of course.
And we actually did it in Oak Park, though, where he lived and was killed.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah, there were enough Capone stories. Let's do one on Sam Giancana.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
And so the cool thing about this, I mean, so it being the theater, we sort of went really old school with it. Like, I was playing, the play had spanned his whole life. It was kind of interesting because it was like a screenplay, but we were doing it on stage in terms of length and the pace of the scenes and the length of the scenes. A lot of changes. And they were like, they had to age me, of course, because I'm a young man and I'm playing him as he grows older. So they sort of went like Orson Welles, Citizen Kane with me in terms of doing the best they could, and putting my hair all the way back and giving me gray and white and like trying to give me wrinkles. But here you'll get a kick out of this. So I will never forget this. The review we got, one review we got, commented on the fact that I was so it didn't comment negatively on the fact of my performance, but what it said was Menolascino, who was right for one of the roles in Jersey Boys, is supposed to be playing Giancana throughout his entire life.
Right.
Which doesn't necessarily come off that way given the budget, because there's a scene where he's at his daughter's wedding and instead it looks like he's getting ready for his junior prom.
His bar mitzvah. He's getting ready for his bar mitzvah. Wow, that's great. That's great. That's one of the fun things, and also one of the, when you look back, I mean, when you're a kid in high school or junior high or even in college, and they choose a play where you've got to play an older person, they put the powder in your hair and whatnot. And there's one of the things that you learn, and certainly for me at my age, is it's always best to kind of have that play in your, not that I would ever say anybody should stay in their lane, but from an age and experience perspective, and I realize as kids, you just play. I mean, I played grown-ups and grandfathers and uncles when I was in high school or whatever, I'm sure. But when I cast now, I mean, there's been some terrific actors that have come before me for roles that they clearly were either way too old for or way too young, and I love the acting, but it broke my heart. They have that expression, kill your darlings, which you utilize a lot in writing or creating characters or whatever. Like, don't, I've fallen in love with actors in the room, and I'm like, oh man, not only would this person be a great actor and be great to have on set, which is equally as important perhaps, but they're just a little too outside. I can't sell it. I can't sell it enough. And
the thing with this production was, even though it was a smaller theater, a repertory theater, the guy who was originally playing the role dropped out at the last second. So they were like, oh, I was playing a smaller part in the play. And when they had their backs against the wall, right as rehearsals were about to start, they were like, well, they decided, they asked me if I would be interested, and I said, yeah, why the hell not? So it wasn't even supposed to be me, and that's kind of like where the age thing came into play.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can see it from their perspective. I mean, if a generational talent walks in the room, if a Meryl Streep came in and auditioned for me, if a Pacino came in and auditioned for me, if a Cillian Murphy came in and auditioned for me, I think I would not find a reason not to cast them. I would think, okay, you know what? I'll rewrite this a little bit. I'll do, or I'll just let it fly, just to, yeah. But yeah, no. When you're one of the things that I've enjoyed so much as I've gotten older, and I'm an older actor now, is it just opens up the world of the characters that you get to play. It's only relatively recently that I've been, being considered to play judges and, the older doctor, and not the hotshot intern from 40 years ago. Those kinds of roles, those media roles. But the other thing too is, as you get older, and I know folks have talked about this, but I always, how can you ask an 18-year-old to play a husband, even a young husband in his 20s, even if he looks the part? Because until you've, not that you need to have been married, but until you've gone through a few grown-up relationships, which is far different than teenage relationships, and had your heart broken as a grown-up,
Mhm.
and come home after making a horrendous mistake, which I did in my younger years for sure. And you can't, that stuff can't come out of your pores until you've lived it. And of course,
That's
now
so
that,
true.
yeah, and that brings me to, I know that we as actors, we never like to really talk much about our process, but dabble a little bit and humor me a little bit, Frank, in regards to what school of thought you're from. Are you, is it a Stanislavski thing, variably a Stella Adler thing, a Lee Strasberg thing, or is it totally instinct? What is it for you that because clearly you've got some technique baked into you
Yeah.
because you're a pro. Tell me about that.
So it's actually a bit of all the above of what you just described, because I've read all of their books, all the
Mhm.
greats, who you mentioned, Uta Hagen as well. And that's who my first teacher was trained under, Uta Hagen.
Okay.
So my traditional training, like the most regimented that I did, was 2 years of Stanislavski focused based training.
Wow.
But I began to, as I got older and as I experienced more and more with different techniques and approaches, it's sort of become like a smorgasbord of all that I've encountered and dealt with
Right,
and
right,
studied.
right.
And like I usually just had this conversation with somebody we were talking about the method and
Mhm.
how it's become mutated over the decades.
Right,
From
right.
what, like, when you think of the method nowadays, people think of like the Jared Leto horror stories or Daniel Day-Lewis
Daniel
and
Day-Lewis.
the
Yeah,
crazy lengths he goes to in order to
yes.
commit to his
I
character.
will I will actually become a cobbler because I'm playing a shoemaker. That
Right.
that that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the method, as I was telling, oh, I forget who I was talking to, but I was saying the method derives from Lee Strasberg, and he was
Mhm.
trained under Stanislavski, like all his
Right,
colleagues at the time, who then went in their own direction.
right.
Method was rooted in what he called emotional recall, which was take your own experiences that drudged up whatever emotions you need to use for this character in their circumstances. Use
Hmm.
that own life experience to get you to that point.
Right, right,
And then
right,
over the years, that has become like what you just said. Oh, well, my character does this. Well, that's what I need to do in
right,
order
right,
to, truly. If my character lives in the woods, I'm gonna go live in the woods. If my
right, right,
if my character does not is a vegetarian, I'm not eating meat for the next six
right,
months. It's become very distorted, and
right,
like
right.
almost like the telephone game over the decades. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
eh,
and I remember like speaking of like famous actor stories, Laurence Olivier, and maybe you know this story about him with
Hoffman
Dustin
story,
Hoffman.
yeah,
Yeah, Marathon Man, where Hoffman's character had to spend the character was up all night running
yeah.
around,
Hmm.
and then Laurence Olivier was the evil dentist, and Hoffman shows up to shoot the scene, and he's in the chair. And of course, this might be like telephone too. This would be the version that came to me. And Hoffman's in the chair, just exhausted, and Laurence Olivier asked him, what's going on? And Hoffman explained what he did because Hoffman was such a method
Yeah.
actor that even Laurence Olivier, who's one of the greatest ever, looked at him and said, "Why don't you just act, man? That's what they're paying you for."
Yeah, yeah, that's the exact story I brought up too. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's
It's the
it.
truth. It's interesting because, like you said, every actor has their own process. Some don't like
Right,
to talk
right,
about it. Some very much like to talk about it.
right, right,
And
right.
the beauty of it is there really is no right or wrong way.
Correct.
It's just
Correct.
whatever gets you to where you need to go, do it.
And that's a great point, Frank, because I know that a lot of young actors may or may not be aware that when you show up on set for the first time, the director is not there to teach you how to act.
Right.
So you have to have whatever it is, whatever your method, whether it's method or total instinct.
Exactly.
You just need to bring, and have already made those choices to bring that character to life, and then be open enough to allow the director to redirect you.
Yes.
But the director is not there to teach you how to act. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I have almost never had a conversation on set, whether it be as an actor or as a director, about the process. That's why, which doesn't mean that I don't enjoy an interchange like this. I love, I love it, and I'm fascinated, endlessly fascinated with the group theater, from which all of this sprang.
Yep.
From where Strasberg was, and Stella Adler, and John Garfield, perhaps one of the first method actors to break out and come to Hollywood, because he needed the money finally. And all the, I think was it William Inge who was associated with that. But anyway, all those folks, and then of course they all left with their various their own versions of what the method was. And Stella Adler making a trip to Paris and meeting with Stanislavski, who apparently said, when she told him what Strasberg was doing, even Stanislavski was saying, like, I don't do it that way anymore. I know I sound like an old Jewish Yiddish man right there, but oh well, too much Mel Brooks. But you can never have too much Mel Brooks.
No, exactly.
Yeah, but anyway, but that's great. But I always do like to touch upon it, because I pretty much, having been exposed to, like you, possibly every process that anyone has, and I'm more like, when I was younger, I was like, okay, you're going to have to commit to one of these and go with it. But then I used the lesson of the Hall of Fame baseball player, the Iron Man of our era, Cal Ripken Jr., who amazingly was one of the few batters, when he would come up to bat, he would move up in the batter's box, move back in the batter's box. He would put the bat here, put the bat there, depending upon who the pitcher was. So now everybody else would just, like, this is where I'm standing, this is where I hold my bat. And again, that worked for them, And I thought, well, gee whiz, if I apply the same rule of Cal Ripken to acting, and then of course being exposed to more actors who will tell me, some days I don't need to, some roles I don't need to dive so deep. Some days, some roles I get, it's a holiday. I just know the lines, or not even, and I show up and I do it. But other times, if I'm going to be playing the Phantom Thread, a la Daniel Day-Lewis, I'm going to need, especially since it's on camera, I'm going to need to know how to sew, and how to cut a pattern. And so that's a different thing. I never minded, and I did this with a couple of movies that I worked on and or TV shows, where we went to, because we were playing soldiers in the field. Well, you got to know some of those drills. It's got to look like you've been through boot camp. You can't just be, old me guessing. People are going to figure that one out. That guy's never been in a uniform before.
Yeah, well, I agree with you there. Like, one of my favorite war films is Platoon, and that's got one of, like, the best casts of all time in terms of star talent of the day and future star talent.
Right.
And they all, Oliver Stone put them through the actual boot camp that U.S. military members would have went through if they were being shipped out. So I totally get that for what you're going to, for certain activities that you're going to have to do on camera. If you're going to do it convincingly, you should go through and learn how to do, like you said, even the sewing or something. It's just, there's like different levels, and like you said, because like the stuff with, again, to bring up like the Jared Leto, the infamous like Suicide Squad stories, where he was playing the Joker and he was sending like gutted pigs to his castmates and like ammunition rounds to like other people, because this is what the Joker would do. But it's like, okay, that's not quite what we're talking about. Like, that's right. What do you like? Why is this necessary? Right. Method, right?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the thing is, now I actually did not know that. I know that Jared, because I've actually met Jared Leto on a couple of
Oh,
occasions.
really?
Yeah, oh yeah, 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 yeah. Out in LA. Um, and another story for another time. But I mean, he was perfectly cordial and nice and everything. Um, but I've heard these stories about that. But I think what happens is when you reach a certain stature, you can get away with
Yeah,
stuff
that's
like
true
that.
too.
Yeah. Now me, and this allows me, as a C-list actor, firmly entrenched as a C-list actor, if I tried any of that stuff, they would replace me almost instantly and say, you need to have a psychological evaluation. So, but I think when you reach a certain stature, and Jared Leto is certainly of that stature, and he's got the talent to back
Well,
it up.
yeah, yeah.
I think folks are a little more willing to give you a little more rope to play with, than yeah, again, for most of us. So, oh, that's very cool.
Well,
So, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Frank. No, you go.
I was just going to say, let me ask you this: like, we're talking about processes and whatnot, and how we both come from. Well, you've done theater work in the past, and I know you're doing some now, right? Or you had done some recently.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I mean, I did. I mean, the first stuff I ever did was theater. I mean, I did. Although I wasn't in the theater department at good old Eastern Michigan University,
Mhm.
down the street from the University of Michigan. Uh, that's as close as I got to going to school in Michigan. But I did some plays there at Eastern Michigan, and that's kind. But I've been performing my whole life. I mean, I was in a rock band in high school that we got paid pretty well. So I did my time as a busboy, but as our little band that we got, our Detroit garage band made up of teenagers, we got some management, and they booked us in this places all around the
Oh,
Detroit
wow.
area. We were, uh, yeah, I was bringing home at that time $50
I
for a
don't.
performance
Yeah, I
in this.
don't think I've ever talked with you about this.
No, probably not. Because what I realized, and I was the lead singer, couldn't play an instrument, have
Oh,
no,
wow. I always
right?
wish I could have been a front man.
Yeah, well, so I was, but here's the thing that happened was that band decided after high school or shortly before high school that when we were done with high school, they were going to high talent out to LA to make it in the music scene. But the epiphany that I had was, you know what? I'm not a lead singer in a rock and roll band. I've been acting like a lead singer. You want to tell immersion
Yeah. Wow.
method or whatever, but because I'd seen, how Mick Jagger did it and how
Sure.
the Beatles did it, and watching all those, Ed Sullivan shows. Google that, kids. Uh, but wherever it was that I would see leads, Dick Clark's American Bandstand, stuff like that. So I knew very well how to act like a lead singer, and I was always the performing kid. So I knew that this has been a role that I've been playing for like 3 years with these guys. So they went out to LA, and then I went off to college, and I ended up meeting a couple of them who, while they didn't work as musicians, but a couple of them became big executives in the music world.
Wow.
Yeah, it really kind of happened for them. So that's
I,
cool.
I, I
But
love that story, especially because, like I said, I always wanted to be a front man. I don't have musical talent, but like you
yeah,
said, the
yeah,
front man is essentially an actor who can sing, and hopefully, if you're lucky, they also can play an instrument to diversify themselves. But
yeah,
yeah, I always thought to myself, man, the only way I'm ever going to be able to do that, make the front man wish come true, is if I somehow get cast to play a
right,
front man in some sort
right.
of production. But what I was getting at initially is, where do you stand on, because we're talking about process,
Mhm.
in terms of the stage and in front of the camera? Obviously, with stage, you get the luxury of rehearsal. And on camera, depending on who said it is, maybe you'll get it. It's not likely. Do you
Right.
like the rehearsal process? Do you wish you had that on set, or do you like the spontaneity of no rehearsals on set, to just going into it?
That's good. That's a great question, Frank. Um, I would say that I'm probably one of those people when I'm doing stage, I love rehearsal. I love rehearsal. Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's necessary, and it's the thing I didn't realize. It's why I'm very focused now on doing theater here in New Mexico. Working with a theater company now, because one of the things that I realized that I missed, I did theater up until I was like 22 or 23 years old, and then moved to LA somewhere in my mid-20s. Did a couple of plays, which I love, but then instantly I was blessed. I started working in film and TV. I hadn't done theater till now since the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now I really want to go back, not go back in time. I'm happy to have the experience that I have and inhabit those roles that I can inhabit now. But I want that rehearsal time. And yeah, I did. I rehearsed a play that ultimately didn't quite. It didn't work out the way any of us wanted. So I ultimately didn't get a chance to do that here in New Mexico. But that's, I've also started work on movies and TV shows, and didn't get a chance. Either I left, or I don't know that I've ever been fired from a role on film or TV, but sometimes things happen. So didn't get a chance to perform here, but that's okay, because that allowed me to at least get involved with this theater community here in New Mexico, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and now I just started working with this theater company, with kind of like the highfalutin title of resident artist or guest artist, which again I'm grateful for. But that's going to allow me in next year, 2024, to start doing much more theater than I've had a chance to do. So I'm looking forward to that. So it's my long-winded way of saying I love rehearsal for stage, but on film and on TV, I'm happy to just let's show up, be prepared, and let's see what we got. Let's see what you got on first take. This is my process as a director is probably the same as I didn't invent it. Let me see what on action, first take. Let me see what the actors brought to the table. Let me see the choices that they made. And at that point, I'll either decide all right, let's go with that. Let's go down that route. Or I might, ask somebody to come aside and give them a note and a redirect or whatever. And I love that process, that collaborative process, and I've certainly had actors who I really thought showing up on set, okay, this is the way I want to see this done. And then action, first take, where I've been like, oh my, thank goodness they did it that way. That's the way we're going to go with this character. That's the way we're going to go with this character. For my rite of passage was one of the first feature films that I ever worked on and got to go on location, way out in the desert. It wasn't too far away from LA, but it was on location. And it was one of these Mad Max Road Warrior type of films.
Oh, okay.
But I was playing this Brooklyn guy in a business suit on this prison planet. So everybody else was in like leather and chains. I have like this brown 3-piece suit and a fedora. We were all sentenced to this prison planet. And great director, his name is Armin Ghazarian. He's in LA. I think he's mainly been a DP, a cinematographer over the years, but he directed this one. And on the first take, I had decided that I was going to give this character a voice. Okay. A voice that I had derived from combining Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate and these tics and things that he does with his voice, and Curly from The Three Stooges. Okay, so
what a combo.
Combine those guys. So on action, I do my thing and I say my little 2 or 3 lines with my high-pitched squeaky voice, and the director Armin goes, cut. Dave, come over here a second. And he puts his arm around me, and I thought, I am going to get fired. Honestly, for this brief 3-second walk we took off to the side of the camera, I thought, I wonder if they'll pay me, if they're going to pay my transpo back to LA, because clearly that was not the right choice. And Armin said to me, "What's with the voice?" And I said, "Well," I said, "you've got all this dramatic tension. All these guys are like super testosterone driven guys, very serious. And my character's the only one who's written with like a nod and a wink. There's a little comedy going on there." So I thought, let's just go for it. And he leaned back a second and he said, "All right, okay, that works then." We walked back and I did the movie that way. And you know, it wasn't a great film, and I don't know that it was a great performance, but I got to tell you, I had so much fucking
fulfilling. Yeah,
oh my God,
that's like, you know, like the validation you hope to get from your collaborators, especially your director.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, to deviate just a tad more, this was, you know, back in the day, they walked around set like on Friday with like a paymaster handing out paychecks.
Mm.
And I hadn't even thought that far. I was like, that's right. This is, and in the envelope, I'm like, I got a check for this thing, man. So, you know, it was a very cool
Beautiful.
moment, very cool.
Beautiful.
But anyway, I digress. So have you had any exposure, either work wise or friends who've worked with like either Steppenwolf or the Goodman Theater, or you know, any of those tried and true Chicago theater companies?
You know what? That actually ties into what I was just going to ask you and wanted to talk about in regards to process and whatnot. So I was going to ask you if you had ever studied Meisner or dabbled in Meisner technique.
I had just started going into Meisner, because a lot of the things I wasn't really, you know, I knew who Sanford Meisner was, didn't know personally, but I knew what his deal was. I started doing some repetition exercises that Meisner would do, not knowing that it was Meisner, you know. And somebody said, you know, that's Meisner stuff. And I was like, really? I mean, you know, so then I read Meisner's book and I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of validity to, because he would be another one who came out of the group theater.
Yes.
Who had his very own specific way of doing it.
And I personally I think his motto on the craft is the most simple and the most like tried and true. And to speak to me, he defined acting as living truthfully under imaginary circumstances.
There you go.
And it's just so simple. You just breaking it down to that one statement, and it just says it all.
Right.
No matter what your approach is, no matter how you get there, no matter what technique.
Right.
And one of his repetition-based exercises I was introduced to in an acting class. Oh my God, 6 years ago now. I don't even want to think about how much time before I even met you.
Oh, it's prehistoric times back then.
Right before I met you, and like about a year before. But I was paired with a young woman named Erica, and she's worked at every major Chicago theater house. She's a friggin' superstar. She just won a Jeff Award for Best Lead Actress.
Oh, wow.
So the Jeff Awards for the non-Chicagoans out there. So you got the Tonys for Broadway theater and, you know, all regional theater. Like the Tonys are like the Oscars for theater. In Chicago, we have our own award ceremony called the Jeffrey Awards, which is basically like the Chicago Tonys for our theater world. And she won Best Lead Actress at the Jefferson.
Wow.
So she's amazing. Like the proudest work I've actually ever done was with her in this acting class that we took together. And it was rehearsing with her that I learned a process, a technique that I still use today when I have the luxury of a rehearsal. And it's Meisner repetition based. And it's, let's say you and I are in a scene. Let's say your line is, "Hey, Frank, go fuck yourself." And my response is, "Why would you say that, Dave?" And your response is, "Because I don't like you." And my response is, "Well, since when don't you like me?" So let's like, the exercise is whatever you say I
Hmm.
repeat your line back to you before I deliver my line, and then
Right,
you do the same with me, and that's how we run the scene.
right, right,
Like if
right,
you were to say, like, say, hey Frank, go fuck yourself.
right. Which I've wanted to say, but now I
Yeah,
finally get a chance.
exactly.
But no, of course not. So if I say, "Hey Frank, go fuck yourself,"
Hey Frank, go fuck yourself. Why would you say that to me?
why
And
would I say that to you? Why wouldn't I say that to you?
why wouldn't you say that to me? Since when do you feel this way? And it's just you
On and
take
on and on.
it,
Yeah,
yeah. And what it does is it forces you to listen to your scene partner
that's it.
and
That's
to
it.
take in what they just said to you before you do anything with your lines.
Right, right.
What I find in the beauty of it is it takes away, and I don't know if you ever experienced this at any point when you were starting out or even down the road if it just pops up, but sometimes, you kind of get caught up in your own head and like you'll get stuck in the, and I know I did when I was starting out, oh, I'm going to say this way. Like I'm going to say this line like that. And you can't do that. And
Hmm.
this exercise takes you away from your own head and eliminates all those hiccups. It
Right, right,
forces
right.
you to only focus on your scene partner and to
Yep,
trust that whatever your preparation was prior to the moment is there and it'll come out of you when it needs to come out of you.
yep,
And
yep.
it's really wonderful in how it forces you to truly take in what your partner is doing and saying to you.
That's great. That's great. And I can see, and that's one of the things that I got when I first met you was here is a really passionate actor, and it's true, and you've just demonstrated that. So, yeah, I really admire your passion. You and I actually did get a chance to work together. We did a
Yes.
thing. It was a show called Bros, not the film that was out a year or two ago.
Oh, right. That's
Yeah, yeah,
right about that. Yeah.
different film. Um, but this Bros anyway. I thought this was fun. There was in one of the episodes. There was a picture that one of the characters has on the wall, and it's a picture of Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese.
Mm-hmm.
And you were cast as the voice of Robert De Niro, and I was cast as the voice of Martin
You were.
Scorsese.
You were. And I
So,
gotta tell you, I did not realize until that moment. Like I had always so like for me, I was like, oh yeah, I would love to do this, even though I always got the Pacino. Like people like, oh, you remind like when I was younger at first starting out, like, oh, you remind me like a young Al Pacino. But I never got the De Niro thing, and I was like, oh, I get to
right.
play like as De Niro, so that's cool. But I didn't realize until I got there, it never struck me. I was like, oh my God, I never got his Marty Scorsese vibes. You could pass as Marty
Well,
if you threw on a wig
yeah,
and you got the
yeah,
caterpillar eyebrows.
right,
You
right,
got the
right, yeah,
voice and the tone, the pitch, and everything.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it comes from being an East Coast immigrant family,
Yeah,
even though it was Boston and it was Jewish, not New York and Irish, or no, Italian. And but it's the proverbial melting pot back there. But
mm-hmm.
but also, um, listening to Marty over the years and
Right.
really, taking in what he was saying, and I love to do voices. I don't often get a chance to do them. I haven't done them professionally a whole lot, but I know it when my brother was my roommate in college. I drove him out of his freaking gourd. Every morning I'd wake up with a new character or real life person that I'd mastered. And I know he couldn't wait. I think he graduated early just to get out of there. And he's still not quite sure who I am inside of here. But but anyway, Frank, I think I've got to wrap this episode up, but we have to have you back so we can continue this conversation, which from my perspective has been absolutely scintillating. And that's not a word I ever use, but I really enjoyed it very, very much going actor to actor with you. And I hope you'll come back and we'll do another episode. Um, and is there anything out there? Because I know I can't, although I can't plug too much. The Screen Actors Guild is still on strike.
Oh,
So
right.
yeah. So by the way, this show that people are watching right now is a SAG production, but it's not an AMTPT production. So we're not. I'm the producer of the show, so the SAG is on strike with the big shot producers.
Yeah, we're not striking you.
They're not striking. No, I'm a little shot producer, but anyway, so we're totally legit. However, there is one thing, and it just occurred to me. It's almost like a humble brag that I'd like to talk about, but I realized, I can't do it. So
Yeah.
is there anything that you want to talk about in regards to anywhere people might be able to, and I realize, the industry, whether it be film or stage, we're still kind of climbing out of this thing. Strike aside.
It's really unfortunate that as soon as the industry started to truly recover, get back to where we were, everything shut down with the strikes again.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that, we may not have a whole lot that's pluggable, but in future shows, hopefully the strike will be over and we can talk about future projects and things like that. You're welcome to, you don't have to, and I can edit this out, but if you have if you're somebody who enjoys it when strangers poke in on your social media, you're welcome to give a plug there. If you're not, it's okay, no judgment. I happen to kind of keep a real low key in the social media world.
Yeah, I try to do the same.
So is there anything you want to add to that? Doesn't seem that way, so I'll just move on.
No, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, if I had something to add, I would add, believe me. I just want to say thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. The time has flown by. I honestly feel like we could talk for another hour, but
of course.
You ever want to have me back, it would be my pleasure. You just let me know, and thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome, Frank. We'll definitely have you back, but then you and I will have to have like a phone call at some point during this World Series just to shoot the shit about baseball, which we all know and love. And I do hope that both your hometown team, the Chicago White Sox, and my hometown team where I grew up in Detroit, the Tigers, I hope we both have better years. But that's for us.
We'll save that for another day.
yeah, absolutely. But Frank Menolascino, thank you so much for being my guest. And we'll talk very soon, my friend, okay?
Thank you for letting me be your guest. I'll talk to you. Take care of yourself.
All right. Take care, friend. Bye-bye.